Hello. Today I will talk about the Ohio train derailment. I don't think enough people are talking about the train derailment in Palestine, Ohio. Um, and I know it's U.S. news, but there's a Canadian connection um, because there's some people that believe that Vinyl Chloride might end up in Canada from the Ohio train derailment. The first article I want to look at is an article from The Guardian. We just need answers, discuss growth in Ohio town after toxic train derailment. Um, and one of the major chemicals that uh, ended up going into the ale is vinyl chloride, and I'll look at uh, the environmental impacts of vinyl chloride. Uh, Residents are concerned um, because while they're told that municipal water is safe to drink, they're also advised to buy bottled water. They've been complaining of rashes um, and those other chemicals that haven't been reported. Oh, I'll check when this report is. Oh, it's Sunday, February 19th. Um, was when this article was written. And then there's a history of the government hiding things or not being truthful, um, not being as informed as they should be. Uh, those Love Canal and Flint, Michigan, where residents had to advocate for themselves um, in order to prove that they were being negatively impacted. Those from uh, from water or chemicals, lead, and there's been So then there's been dead animals reported. Um, and then there's a lot of talk about um, like there not being breaks since the Civil War. I don't think that was mentioned in this article, but um, I have another article where it mentioned where breaks are mentioned. Um, oh yeah, dead pets or foxes were reported. Birds have disappeared. There was a quote about like a high school having a smell. Um, and then people have been told to go to poison control instead of seeing no physicians because family doctors able to aren't trained in chemical exposure. Yeah, there was a smell in the high school. There was a contaminated creek. Um, and then the rail company refused to take part in a town hall meeting, which was problematic. Um, The given residents are given $1,000, but it won't cover a lot of the fallout. Um, People might not be able to sell their houses because of the contamination. Um, and then people are wondering why they're not being uh, paid to relocate. And yeah, so it's definitely a scary ongoing situation in East Palestine, Ohio. Um, and I'll see if I can switch to the breaks. Oh, yeah, I'll go on to this one. Um, yeah, so on there was a reporter that was arrested during a news conference um, for doing their job. So that's one of the concerns that people have, that those a cover up of the story. Oh, I should say the name. Evan Lambert was arrested um, for trespassing despite being a reporter covering the press conference. There's another article from The Guardian. What do we know about Ohio train derailment and chemical leak? Um, so it was heading from Pennsylvania to Illinois and caused a major fire. Um, and this sounds like it's a small town in East Palestine. Uh, 2,000 residents were evacuated, and the train was from Norfolk Southern Corporation. Um, and then, yeah, residents are complaining about the effects of the chemicals in the air, water, and soil. Um, they purposely um, sent made an explosion so that it would go into the air. Um, and this is the vinyl chloride is a known carcinogen, so it causes cancer. No deaths were reported from people, anyways. Um, and then, vinyl chloride is used to make polyvinyl chloride or PVC. Um, So all those like pipes, and it's colorless and highly flammable, which is strange that it's not listed as a hazardous chemical. And I'll get into that. It has been linked to liver cancer as well as other types of cancer like leukemia and lung cancer. Short-term effects include dizziness and drowsiness, while high exposure can lead to hospitalization and death. And another chemical was butyl acrylate used in plastic production. I just want to see. Yeah, and feel free to send anything in the chat, and I will. Yes, I should be. Yeah, I'm just checking the sound because last time didn't quite work. Um, yeah, so the EPA Environmental Protection Agency released information that showed that there was unreported chemicals that were released: ethyl hexyl alkylate, isobutylene, and ethylene glycol monobutyl ethyl. Uh, and then exposure can cause shortness of breath, burning in the skin and eyes, coughing, headaches, and nausea, among other symptoms. There was a malfunction of an axle, so connection of wheels that caused the derailment. And then there's an investigation still underway. Um, yeah, so there's been like reports consistent with the chemicals of symptoms. And then the residents are suing Norfolk Southern. Um, um, yeah, a lot of residents in the U.S. live near areas that are vulnerable to deadly derailments. There was a similar derailment in New Jersey that caused 23,000 gallons of vinyl chloride to be released into the environment. Um, and then there was a push for further regulation. And then there was a push to have a law required for change carrying toxic substances to be retrofitted with electronic braking systems, which brake trains immediately altogether rather than front to back like conventional brakes. Um, and then for some reason, this wasn't included. This was repealed, and vinyl chloride was not included as a hazardous substance, even though it's cancerous. There was a huge explosion. It's flammable. For some reason, it's not included as a hazardous substance. So, another factor in all this is local safety. This article says it's called America's Freight Train Drivers Are Exhausted and Overworked. Um, and it's from Vice News. In April 2022, so relatively recent. So they're saying there's a question: what happens if the people doing those jobs, freight trains, don't get much sleep? What happens when the company running the trains implements systems that deprive its already weary workers of much needed Zeds? Oh, oh, those. Oh, oh, I guess it. Almost. Oh, this was like a podcast. So people asked to be on call 90% of the time. Um, Unpredictable work schedule. And sleep deprivation has been found to be a factor in some of the train derailments. Um, uh, Rushed safety, skipped low quality work. Um, um, oh, it says that people unpaid 18 to 48 hours waiting to get called to take a train back home. Um, yeah, and yeah, so I'll have to read this more in depth. But there's a lot of like you can't be sleeping while driving a heavy machine like a train. Um, it's just not something that you can reasonably be expected to do, especially with hazardous chemicals on board. So yeah, these articles are saying that there's a lot of unpaid work or waiting unpaid or sleep deprivation due to long hours. That's an issue that's not being talked about enough. Sleep deprivation of vocals. So that's that. What did I? Oh, yes. There was an article called Ohio Train Derailment NTSB Trail Issues Plea to Those Spreading Misinformation. Um, yeah, so this is saying the electronic braking rule would not have applied on, would have applied only to high hazardous flammable trains. The trains that derailed in East Palestine were mixed freight train containing only three plaque-coated Class 3 flammable liquids. Calls. but they were still flammable. Um, um, so I'm just looking for. Oh yes, I have a safety data sheet for vinyl chloride. Um, so it's a, in this case it's a gas. I think it's a gas. And um, so the hazards are that it's extremely flammable gas, may form explosive mixtures with air, and it's under pressure, uh, and can explode if heated. So there was a fire, it exploded, may cause frostbite, may displace oxygen and cause rapid suffocation, and may cause cancer, um, and may cause damage to organs through prolonged or repeated exposure. And then you're supposed to get medical attention. Um, um, there should be environmental section. Oh, environmental precautions. Ensure emergency procedures to deal with accidental gas releases are in place to avoid contamination of the environment. Inform the relevant authorities if the product has caused environmental pollutions. So in this case, it has methods for contaminant and cleaning up. So this would be a large spill. Immediately contact emergency personnel. Stop leak if without risk. Use spark-proof tools and explosion-proof equipment. See Section 1 for emergency information and Section 13 for waste disposal. Um, yeah, so we already know that it's a hazardous material. Boiling point is negative 13.4 degrees Celsius, so it's a gas. Um, they don't have the density. Um, yeah, and then I have, oh, and then I have. There's an opinion. This chemical should be banned. Now see who it's. Miss Foucault, Director of Science Communications at the Green Science Policy Institute, and Dr. Rosno, a professor of social medical sciences and history at Columbia, Dr. Markowitz, history professor, and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I'm just going to see how. And this is an opinion piece. Um, so it's saying vinyl chloride is particularly dangerous and increasingly common, used primarily to make polyvinyl chloride, um, which is used in pipes, while cable coatings and packaging. And they're saying that uh, they, there should be a phasing out of this chemical. Um, yeah, inhaling fumes can be deadly. So it's known to cause liver cancer in highly exposed industrial workers. It has been associated with brain and lung cancers. And it should be labeled as hazardous waste. And the burden would put, and this would put a burden on users for safe storage, transportation, and disposal, and an incentive to accelerate its elimination. And it's one of the most produced petrochemicals in the world. Oh, it was used at hairspray until the 1974. That's um, scary. Um, and then they're saying that as long as PVC protection continues, the risk of vinyl chloride spills will persist. Both small workers and communities will be exposed to the ticking time bombs of cancer and other health harms. And I think I read that one. Oh, and this is an article from CNN saying some of the same things. East Palestine residents worry rashes, headaches, and other symptoms may be tied to chemicals from train crash. Um, so that's worth exploring. Let's see. So this is 8 pages. So those inhalation exposure to humans and animals. More animals have died, but at least one person has died. Um, or is this? Um, um, I think it's like the. There was a stall. Uh, Indicates studies discussed in Chapter 2. The number of studies include those finding no effect. No normal studies in human or animals were located. Most of them studies examined multiple endpoints. Oh, okay. So this is just saying that. So I'm just reading this. Oh, environmental fate. Vinyl chloride primarily partitions to the air, where it is degraded relatively quickly by petrochemically produced hydroxyl radicals. And that was from a study from in 1994. It is removed from the surface, water, and soils mainly by volatilization and photodegradation. Biodegradation and hydrolysis can occur, um, but these reactions are generally slow as compared to volatilization rate. More information regarding transformation and degradation in soil and water would be helpful for defining potential pathways for human exposure. Um, so this is saying that it does degrade. That doesn't give a timeline on that, um, and how much is degraded. Um, Bioavailability from environmental media. This um, research, um, it can be absorbed following inhalation and uh, dermal exposure, so skin. Um, and then there's potential for vinyl chloride to contaminate air. Um, and then it's saying information regarding the bioavailability from ingestion and dermal contact with contaminated soils would be helpful. Um, and it can bio concentrate to a limited extent in aquatic organisms. So there's a creek nearby. So um, some of the gas might have gone into the creek. Biomagnifications of vinyl chloride in terrestrial and aquatic food chains does not appear to be important because of its high volatility and the fact that it is really metabolized by higher tropic level organisms. Um, okay. Um, what's this? So this article is called "How Vinyl Chloride Chemical Released in Ohio Derailment Can Damage the Liver." From I don't know the newspaper. Um, so yeah, it's been shown to cause liver cancer. And the health risks were discovered in the 1970s. Um, and then there was a factory in the Rubbletown neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky. And then those locals that uh, um, experience the rare type of cancer. Um, it can accumulate in enclosed spaces. Um, so private wells might be a concern. And yeah, and then the test, like the safe limit isn't safe. Um, oh, and then I looked at the lethal dose for rats, 500 megagrams, micrograms per kilogram, um, only and 130,000 pulse per million after 2 hours. So that's not a lot um, to be exposed uh, to. But this is like if you're like ingesting it. And then the effects, and then I should specify like those effects prior um, to the mice dying, um, and effects after, like long term effects as well to consider, not just short term effects. Um, so some of the impacts were narcosis, congestion, hemorrhages of the lung, and congestion of the liver and kidney were observed after 30 minutes of exposure at 10,000 to 30,000 pulse per million. Um, yeah, and then I looked at the demographics because in um, stories about hazardous waste sites, it's important to look at um, what's happening in terms of demographics, because a lot of times um, black areas that are mostly black or mostly racialized faced higher contamination. Um, and then there's a whole thing on environmental racism. This community is mostly a white community. Um, it doesn't appear to be different than most of the U.S. Um, I mean, large sections of the U.S. Um, so it doesn't really. I don't see it standing out. I didn't do any statistical analysis. I just found a website. Um, and then I looked at like income. It's not like a rich neighborhood, but I don't see it as a very poor neighborhood either. Um, yeah. So where am I? Yeah, Yeah, so in terms of the Canadian connection, they're saying there's an article from CBC saying toxic train derailment in Ohio highly unlikely to impact Ontario, federal officials say. And this should be taken. This should be taken with a bit of skepticism as well, because of a history of um, the government hiding things, um, not being fully transparent, and residents having to advocate for themselves, especially in the U.S. But in some cases, Canada does this as well. Um, so some of this has been repeated. Um, so they're saying that the winds are blowing in the opposite direction to southern Ontario and the Great Lakes. And the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, um, in the Niagara region is looking at this, including environmental defense. They're looking at Canadian officials for guidance. They've been monitoring the situation and not aware of any evidence that this poses a threat to the Great Lakes Basin or Ontario. So, and that's environmental defense spokesperson. And then the Conservation Authority spokesperson Missy Furazi said the organization would proactively address any issues that arise, and if they do, communicate those with residents. So that's another reason why conservation authorities should not be defunded, because they'll like they watch for things, um, uh, like environmental disasters if they cross the border.